Hello, in this video I'm going to take a look at rood screens, the physical barrier between the high altar and the chancel and the nave, and they are features that seem to have been introduced into parish churches around about 1250, and they were there to keep people and animals out of the chancel. Until about 1800, many people took their dogs with them when they went along to church, and it required many parish churches to appoint official dog whippers to keep them in order, paid for by the church wardens. And I guess these dog whippers would come in useful for keeping people paying attention if they were nodding off in the congregation. If you go to St Anne's Church at Baslow in Derbyshire, just inside the door they still have their dog whip. It's now inside a glass case. And at St Margaret's Church at Wrenbury in Cheshire, they still have their dedicated dog whipper's pew. Most surviving rood screens date to the 15th and the early 16th century. The name rood derives from the Anglo-Saxon word for cross, and a tall cross rose above most rood screens, typically with the figures of the Virgin Mary on one side and St John on the other, a reminder that the way to the sanctuary was by Christ. And above the rood screen, a common feature was a rood loft. This was a narrow gallery with room for a small choir and sometimes also an organ, from which prayers were said and hymns were sung, particularly on the major feast days. Now, the idea of a visual barrier between the nave, the high altar and the chancel was inconsistent with the ideals of the Reformation, and a lot of medieval screens were removed or destroyed after the break with Rome. Others were cut down in height and made more open, and repainted or whitewashed to cover up any images which were thought to be associated with so-called superstitious or popish practices. And as features, screens reappear in the Victorian period, when there was revived enthusiasm for medieval architecture and the High Church Anglo-Catholicism promoted by the Oxford movement gains traction. In the medieval period, the rood would be covered during Lent and then uncovered on Maundy Thursday in readiness for the Good Friday service, in which worshippers would crawl to the cross on their knees. Rood lofts vanished along with the roods, but what we often find are blocked doorways halfway up the wall at the entrance to the chancel, or 2 or 3 steps leading nowhere, and they show where the rood loft was once accessed. You can see this at St Mary's Church at Tunstead in Norfolk and at All Saints Church, Crostwhite in Norfolk. Rood stairs have been preserved at St Nicholas's Church, Hinksworth in Hertfordshire. And some fine rood screens have survived, perhaps as a result of them being in remote places, away from London and the centre of power. Others were removed to store, which enabled them to be replaced later. This is the rood screen at St Andrew's at Colompton. It's 11 bays wide, 3 for each aisle and 5 for the nave, each with a central door, and the tracery closely follows the pattern of the aisle windows. The fan tracing of the coving with its ornamental bosses supports a beautifully carved cornice with vine trails, and vines, like ivy, very useful decorative feature, can be made to curl around the stonework or the woodwork and around the edges of pictures. And of course we have the association of wine with the Eucharist, so it has vital symbolic significance. It was also an important crop in Palestine, a sign of abundance. In Genesis chapter 49, Jacob blesses Judah by saying the land will be so wealthy he will tether his donkey to a vine and wash his clothes in wine. And in the New Testament, of course, vines symbolise Christ, who describes himself, this is in the Gospel of St John, I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. At the west end of St Andrew's Church, there are 2 massive oak beams that are carved with rocks, skulls and bones. This is known as the Golgotha. named after the site of the crucifixion, translates as the place of the skulls. And this is the beams that once held the rood and the figures of the Virgin Mary and St John. A unique survival from the Reformation. This 15th century screen, the Church of St Michael and All Angels at Barton Turf in Norfolk, depicts the Virgin Mary with saints and angels, and it's painting and gilding of the very highest quality. This screen at St Peter's Church at Cumbria in Devon has its original decoration, and from the costumes we can date it to around about 1520. And the scenes include the Virgin and Child, and she's with two of the Magi, Caspar and Melchior. We have St Apollonia with her tooth in pincers, one of the tortures that she suffered at a martyrdom in 3rd century Alexandria, another female saint, and an Annunciation scene with the Archangel Gabriel, and the martyrdom of St Edmund, 9th century king of East Anglia, killed by the Vikings for his refusal to deny his faith. One of the earliest rood screens to survive, its loft has gone but the screen itself has survived, this simple 14th century stone screen in St Mary's Church, Ilkeston in Derbyshire. Among the more interesting later examples of a screen reintroduced in the Victorian period, this cast and wrought iron example is at the Church of St Mary and St Bega, the former Priory Church, now the Parish Church of St Bees in Cumbria, and it was added during the restoration by the architect William Butterfield, and it reflects a transition in style from arts and crafts naturalism to the more sinuous flowing lines of Art Nouveau. Exceptionally, some rood lofts have managed to survive. This late 15th century and almost complete example is at St Mary's Church, Attleborough in Norfolk. The main screen panels have pictures of saints. And this is in the tiny, isolated church of St Edith at Coates in Lincolnshire. And that dedication to St Edith is one of 17 in the country. She was the Anglo-Saxon abbess of Polesworth Abbey. Next time, I'm going to take a look at how our parish churches served secular purposes, and in particular, how the porch was used. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons and click on the notification bell to be informed when the next video is available. Or you can subscribe by clicking on the rose window over my shoulder.